So, hello, Phil, and welcome, and thank you for coming on and having a little chat with me.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here as always. And yeah, looking forward to your penetrating questions about breathwork.
So, everyone, today I'm speaking with Phil Morey, who's the founder of Inspired Breath. He's an experienced breathwork practitioner, facilitator, as well as a trainer, and he's also a colleague of mine and committee member of the Australian Breathwork Association. So I guess, Phil, would be really nice to sort of explore your personal journey with breath work. I think, like all of us have a journey, how we got into breath work, how we became breath workers. Like, let's look at maybe some of your early training and maybe your approach to breath work and how that's evolved, because I know my journey with breath work has evolved to the way I kind of learned and to where I am today.
Mm,
So
yeah.
thank you for being here. So let's start with before breathwork entered your life, who was Phil Morey and what was happening in your life at that time?
Right. Well, okay. Well, look, basically I got to my early 30s. We'll start there. Okay. I won't go too far back. But other to say that I had an interest in meditation and breath, from the age around 18, basically. I was very interested in how to deal with anxiety because I had a lot of anxiety. And yeah, I read Ainsley Mears's book, who was a famous 1960s psychiatrist based in Melbourne and did a lot of meditation. He was a psychiatrist, but did meditation. So moving on to my early 30s, I was, basically a wandering hippie, not really no fixed address. And I was at Confest, which is a alternative lifestyle festival. And there was a guy there talking about schizophrenia and what it meant in terms of his worldview. And he started talking about the body and the breath, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I got involved in some body work, which was sort of based on Jack Painter's work first, and then my friends kept telling me after I did that, about 2 years later, you've got to do breath work. You've got to do breath work, Phil. You'd love it. So, and I eventually enrolled in what was to be a long training. It was over 7 years, really, with different people. But yeah. But who I was a person who was looking for something deeper than just being a dude who was, being nice to people and being a hippie and trying to connect with the earth and doing vegetable gardening. I needed more than that. And to me, breath work really I think it was appealing to me because it was a drug-free way of going into what I call, the psychedelic world or the world of a different realm.
Yes,
And I was always frightened of LSD. I was always frightened of psychedelics. I didn't take them. So I was interested in breathwork for that reason, because it helped me. I think it helped my thirst for finding something other than just ordinary consciousness. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Okay. So can you remember your very first breathwork session and like what happened? What made you
Mm.
realize that?
Yeah, I can. It actually was in 1991. So that was obviously about 14 years before I actually studied it. I did a series of 3 sessions in Melbourne because I just found it and I didn't continue with it. But I still remember the first session, and it was very specific. And I just remember a daydreaming or a vision of me leading a merry band of people in this sort of like procession, and I was playing pan flutes or a flute, leading these people along through some sort of field. And I don't know why, but that was my first, um, sort of imprint of breath. But I went into places in that first breathwork session which were also very dark and a bit voidy, like there was nothing much happening. So I was curious, but it didn't have such an impact on me as a 20-year-old as it did later in life. I just sort of let it be because I wasn't getting, I didn't sort of feel that it was for me at that time. But so it's interesting. That's my first experience, 1991. Yeah.
All right. Who were your original trainers in breathwork, and like what did each of them give you? Because I heard that you said
Mm.
various sort of trainers. Uh,
Yeah. So basically I had two sets of training, although it's a bit of a grey area because I did one module with Groff, and so I didn't train as a Groffarian person. in terms of the transpersonal training. But yeah, I studied with a guy called originally with Diva
Oh yeah.
Dirisha. His other name was Robin Barkey Hall. He was a philosopher at Melbourne Uni who was knew Raymond uh, Gator. And so it was like he was part of a school of philosophy. He also came from a sort of a fundamentalist Christian background. Then he moved on to Osho. So he was an interesting guy, Darisha. He had a mix of traditions.
Mm.
And also he learned breathwork in the 80s under, doing a lot of Stan Groff's workshops, including Phillip Island or something like that in 1980. And also his wife, Roshana, who had a background in Yanaf's work of, primal work. She also taught breathwork they swapped. So they were like a husband and wife team. She was also a very powerful teacher as well. So I learned from those two primarily, and also I would argue I did immerse 6 days, 8 days of my life with Groff transpersonal training in Tasmania with a few other breath workers who I knew from the ABA. And yeah, we did Spiritual Emergency was the name of the module, and it was really good because it expanded my palette as to what's possible in a breathwork session, and also really getting in touch with non-ordinary states of consciousness and how we can not pathologize that and move it into something else, and breath work being part of that. So yeah, it was great. I had a really interesting mix of getting it direct from Groff transpersonal training, and also I'd also argue that Diva Dirisha and Shivam Rashana, as they were called, also had a varied background, but they both learnt in the sort of Groff style of breath, I suppose, but a gentler version of Groff work. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. So what part, when you look back at those trainings, what parts have remained with you now that you use? Is there anything specific
Mm.
you like to use? And
Yeah, you know what? I think the importance of getting the music or trying to get the music correct for the mood of the room.
oh yeah.
That was one of them. I mean, the music is not everything. They also taught me, um, Diva Dirisha and Shivam Rashana, they taught me that it's also okay to have silence when you do a breath work. You don't actually need music. Music is an assistant. So that was one thing I learned. The other thing I learned was to make sure the body feels safe before breathing. Like don't just lie them on a yoga mat, put them on a comfortable mat. Like make sure you've got lots of blankets, a spit bowl, tissues at the ready. Make sure everything's set up. Really focus on making sure the person is comfortable. That's what they taught us, which was really good actually. And also the art of not over intervening in someone's process. Um, they were really good at telling us, or sort of, guiding us as to when to intervene in a breathwork session with maybe light touch to remind
Mm.
people to breathe. And then at the other end, when, they sort of told me off when I was trying too hard, like over intervening in someone's session. So yeah, and they weren't necessarily focused on the cathartic aspects of the breathwork session either. So that's what I learned.
Yeah, actually, I think they're pretty important things to keep in mind. And I like how you said not to intervene. I think I'm pretty much the same way these days. So
Hmm.
your website asks, what if breathwork was only half the story? So what is the other half then, Phil?
Well, there's breath and there's work. No. Um, the other half of the story, other than breath work, to me, is the body, right? So, I mean, that sounds like, sort of a trite statement. What I'm trying to get at is that what I have noticed over the whatever it is, I've been doing breath work in groups since 2013. It's been a while now, 13 years of it. And I'll tell you what I notice is that some people are just not talking or with their body while they're sort of either before or as they're settling into a breathwork session, and they're really quite they're not embodied, they're disembodied, which means that the feeling they're like it's like there's a separation going on between the breath and the body, and to me that was like a bit disturbing because it was like there was sort of a possibility of spiritual bypassing happening, so where people are just going out into the universe first without actually feeling what's happening in their internal state with their body.
You think that's like an escapism then from
It
feeling?
can be. Look, I believe that particularly adults who were prone to um, disassociation or moving into magical thinking when things weren't going too well as in their environment when they were a kid, often those sort of people will go into magical thinking really quickly and, or very intellectual spirituality. And those sort of people can be attracted to breath work. But what
Mm.
I notice is that they become very sort of addicted to this, to getting a maximum spiritual experience, whereas actually it's not serving them in that case because they need to be way more in touch with the pain that resides inside their body. And a breathwork session can just literally be more of the same for them. So just that I don't know, like there's something going on there which I think is really important. It doesn't mean I think breathwork is not useful for those people, but it has to, for those sort of people, it needs to be, we need to make sure that they're just not skipping things inside themselves, which they're, continuously skipping to get to the secret. You know what I mean?
That's an observation I've had with a lot of I get a lot of younger people that come that have been doing like, breathing on the beach or, like really
Mm,
pushing to get into these, full-on altered states that they, like you said, they kind of bypass the body and they're just
mm,
out there. And it really, I think it defeats the purpose. And I don't know whether it's like an ego thing again, where it's like the ego just kind of stops them from going deeper.
mm. Uh, I I also think that there's a sort of shallowness to a lot of modern breath work, what I call modern breath work, which is not conscious connected breath. Wim Hof, there's a lot of resilience and competition with those, but also they're very good at sometimes alleviating anxiety and depression. But for me, I think there's also like, unfortunately, there's a tendency for a lot of people to control the out breath. So you often see with people who've done a lot of Wim Hof or breath holds or sort of what I call, resilience breathing, they tend to do,
Connected breathing at all, is it? It's another form of breath work. But I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes with those people, it's like you have to teach them to, oh, well, I kind of say, look, that's great. Just let that kind of breath out of the room and let's try this kind of breathing, which is controlling the inhale, surrendering the exhale.
Exactly. You know what? There's a lot of people who struggle with that surrender breath.
Mm.
And I mean, it is, the surrender breath is more difficult than the inhale. It's really interesting. It's actually to fully surrender into that letting go is actually like it's a challenge, but when you get it, it's a very interesting, powerful, dynamic there. Anyway, yeah.
Especially when then, the breath, it's almost like the breath starts to breathe you and it just becomes, you're not even aware that it's doing it. And then you're kind of doing this amazing circular breathing without any effort.
Yeah. And look, if you have a tight jaw and you're controlling the exhale by blowing it out, you're just never going to have the full experience of a breathwork session because it's, or what's possible in a breathwork session.
I was in my early days where I just did not know how to let go, and it was like 30
Yeah.
seconds closed. So Phil, how do you combine bioenergetics and movement with conscious connected breathing? And why do you often
Mm.
activate the body before
Yeah.
deeper?
So yeah, usually I sort of came to bioenergetics through YouTube really, and I read Alexandra Lowen's book about how to deal with anxiety and depression through bioenergetics, and I was just really impressed when I started doing it about how good it was to warm the body up, to get people in touch, including me, in touch with my body and what was happening with my ability to shut down. Like a lot of bioenergetics is really about opening up your life force, like breath work, but it's a slightly different approach because you're moving your body, like, you might be moving your shoulders and breathing through the mouth, and it's a stand up, a bit more lightweight, a bit of humor can be involved, you can make a noise. It's like a good preliminary exercise before I lie people down on the mat because it helps bring up it sort of like already starts that process of pushing the person in a gentle way to their challenge point where their brain starts going, I don't want to do this anymore, it hurts, or I don't want to do this anymore. I'll break if I keep doing this, and then you breathe and you move through something. So
Mm.
there's like that. I feel that this bioenergetics is, I mean, it's not breath work as conscious connected breath, but it is, using the breath. And of course, anything to do with sort of Wilhelm Reich's early work, I really like. And so, bioenergetics is an extension of that. And why do I like it? Because it really helps let the mind let go. Um, that's it. It's like getting rid of our heads and taking them off and putting them aside. So
Yeah.
that's why I like it.
Okay. So for someone who has never experienced your work, what would an inspired breath session actually look like and feel like? Hang on, I think, is that your Wi-Fi, Phil?
Hello, can you got me?
Let me just ask that again. Are we back yet?
Yeah.
Someone who has never experienced your work, what would
Mm.
an inspired breath session actually look like and feel like?
Oh, yeah.
Like, do you do like an interview, and how does it?
Yeah, yeah, sure. No, I don't do preliminary interviews, but well, sometimes I just talk on the phone for a bit longer if they just ring me up out of the blue. But usually I sort of, reserve that for when they come in front of me. I sit them down. We just have a discussion for. First of all, I ask them, what are you here for, and what brings you here. Not what are you here for. It's like what brings you here. What's the motivation for coming? Either curiosity or I'm really stuck, or I've had people come just because they've had a bad health situation, physical health deteriorated, and they just want more energy. I mean, they've recovered, but then they're flat. Or
Mm,
people who've had divorces, people who've like got really churned up around relationships. And I listen. I mean, my goal is to listen, but it's not a counseling session because I'm not a counselor. So what I do is just listen, observe. I also observe, I read their body a bit, like are they talking really fast, or are they talking really quietly? Are they talking loudly at me? Do they seem hyperactive? Or I mean, I observe all that as they're talking to me.
yeah.
Do they feel numb, or are they good at articulating their feelings? So, I judge all that. So we might spend a good 20 minutes there, 25 minutes. So nearly half an hour probably. Especially the first session. I need 30 minutes. Yeah. And then I'll say, okay, we're going to get up and we're going to move our bodies and we're going to do 10, I give them like 10, 7 to 10 minutes of bioenergetics. So, that can be anything from doing leg work, upper body work,
Mhm.
just moving their shoulders. A lot of it can be just like opening and relaxing all this area around the eyes and the mouth,
Yeah.
all that tension around the eyes and the mouth before they lie down to breathe. So maybe something like that, depending on the person. Um, and then, yeah, I make sure, I tell them about the breath. So this is the thing. I tell them it's okay if their bladder's full in the middle of the session to go to the toilet. I tell them that you might get tetany. I tell them like what can go on. You might get a lot of mucus. You might need to spit it out. Like I explain all the phenomena, not all of it. I explain all the physical stuff that can happen while you're doing a breathwork session. So it's not a surprise to them. I make sure I do that.
I do the same.
Um, yeah.
Oh,
And then, so they're really clear that, when if their bladder is activated, then they can get, just gradually get up and I'll take them to the toilet and come back. And you
mm,
can keep going and still have an experience. So those sort of simple practical stuff. And then, I make sure that, like that they're tucked in, they've got like a nice blanket on them, not too much.
mhm.
They're warm, or they're cold or cool if it's a hot day. And make sure something's under their knees so they don't, collapse their back, or collapse their legs. Some people don't like the back pain that starts up with flat legs, all that stuff. I make sure they're comfortable. Sometimes if they ask for an eye mask, I'll give them one, but otherwise I don't. Um, Bit of relaxation, and then we start the breath. This conscious connected breath, at least 70 minutes of that, and then integration time. Sometimes if the person just gets tired after 45 minutes of breathing, I just let them go. But yeah.
So
Um,
it's
yeah,
breath.
that's the arc of the session. I always use music. I try not to use music with too many words.
Mhm.
And the music's, it's part of it. It's not everything. And I'm just making sure that the person, just keeps going. Even if they get really stuck somewhere in the first, 30, first 45 minutes, I'll help them out a bit if they feel lost, or might even have a brief check in with them while they're breathing, if they really look lost.
Mm.
Um, But I don't engage in inner child work. I don't engage in anything like that while they're having a breathwork session. That's my style. It's pretty sort of basic, but I will occasionally touch the body if I feel it's relevant.
Okay.
Yeah. So I seek permission to touch. If any touch isn't, it's okay. Usually the top of the ribs, maybe
Yeah.
sometimes the knees, the feet for grounding.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hips. That's that, I do gentle touching, but I'm not doing body work on people while they're breathing. Just want to make that clear.
Then that's not breath work, is it?
No, as soon as people start mixing, like doing Reiki or kinesiology or massage or any or body work on anything, you shouldn't really be doing that during a breathwork session.
Yeah.
The other thing I have a bit of trouble with now, even though I sort of get why some of it benefits some people, is the use of cannabis with a breathwork session or something like that. Like it gets a little bit messy for me. I'm like a bit of a purist in that regard. Yeah.
I've never heard of that, but okay. Uh,
Yeah, it's all the rage.
uh, it's interesting because I'm thinking back to I went to a summer in Sweden, and
Mm,
there I kind of learnt about, even earlier on you said about no music, right?
mm,
So, like that you don't always have to have music, and um, you know, the technique can just be really gentle. It can even be just nose breathing, instead of mouth breathing.
mm.
I don't know. Do you like nose or mouth with your clients?
I always encourage mouth breathing in the beginning. If they really struggle, I'll allow nose in and mouth out. But I generally don't allow people to breathe through their nose through the whole session. I just won't let them do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, obviously I've interviewed and met a lot of even the pioneer breath workers, and I notice a lot of them tend to do more nose, but
Mm.
it's just
I
experiencing the power of
Yeah.
breath itself without any intervention, even no touching. And even if someone stops breathing, just to allow them until they come
Mm.
breathe.
Yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
I think there's a role for just a purer session. Yeah.
Yeah, I like,
Um,
I think that's great.
yeah. I I'm interested in person. You know what my goal is? I used to think my goal was to make sure they had a good catharsis when I started out. The ego and you're a youngster and you're just like I'm new on the scene. Not everyone's got to like get it all out. And I've
Um,
totally changed that too. I want to make sure that they are comfortable in the breath. That's it for me. Like comfortable in their body and comfortable in their breath. When I say comfortable, I don't mean that the whole session is comfortable. I just mean that they have a level of safety and trust in their bodies, in their body and their breath, try and get that moving through the whole session. So if they have a big event, like a big release or a big fear comes up, that we can move through that and then come back to the breath. You know what I mean? Like I'm very interested in that whole thing of just not letting people just lie there,
mm.
especially in the first 45 minutes. I'm really like, I want to keep that person breathing. Anyway, that's my style. Yeah.
Thank you. So, going, I guess with breath work, there's a lot of the relationship to birth and our life and patterns. So, birth imprinting is central to your training. So, how did
Mm.
you first become interested in the possible influence of birth on adult
Mm.
patterns and choices?
How did I get into that? Yeah, it's interesting. I think, you know what? I think it came from, well, like it came from obviously Leonard Orr's background with rebirthing and the birth tub,
Did you
but
do it?
really what struck me when I first came to breath work, I mean, Darisha and Roshana, where they also ran courses in how to have, natural births and lotus, not lotus births, where you don't cut the cord to the placenta and keep it in a basket for a few weeks after the birth or a few days, whatever.
Mm,
And so there was this interesting good birthing culture going on at the center where I was training, and at the same time, Darisha was really good at spotting birth trauma when it came up in a session. So, um, yeah, I mean, look, there was a lot of different things that can happen at birth, and mine was, I suppose to go out a bit further before I go into personal stuff. It's more that I don't think that Freudian psychoanalysis or modern counseling techniques get to the basic building blocks of our nervous system formation. That's what I think, and that happens in the womb. and it happens for the first 6 to 12 months of life. And that is what is missing in a lot of modern psychology. And I would argue that breath work brings that right to the fore. It brings what happens, from conception down to birth and the first 6 to 12 months before you can even speak. That foundational time of the first, let's say, 9 months in the womb, year after birth, is critical to understanding what is going on with a person. And sometimes you don't know the story. You've got to make guesswork happen if you sort of start to see things as people breathe. But does that make sense?
It does. So do you do hot water breath work? Have you been trained in doing hot and cold water breath work?
No, no, I did not. I was not trained in that. No, but I understand what it is, and I've attempted this
Have you tried
warm
it?
water birthing.
Have you experienced it then?
Yeah, it's
Snorkel and
yeah, and it's definitely a different experience. I feel it's much more oceanic and gentle in some ways.
I love it. I kind of I do a lot of it with my clients, but also in my training I teach it.
Yeah. Do you have a space at your clinic where you can do that?
Yes, I have a little. I've got a portable little jacuzzi. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
blow them
Yeah,
up.
and literally, so that's using a snorkel and a face mask.
Yep. And if people are really uncomfortable, you can still float them on their back and water at about no more than 38 degrees Celsius.
And so is it basically just standing next to them with a hand under their belly, and then they're face down, and you hold them for 45 minutes? I mean, what's the
Yeah,
format?
I bring them in slowly until they get comfortable breathing through the snorkel. Then they gently put their face down, and then if they let go, and then you can, and then basically the water supports them, and you just might have a just one hand just on their tummy or just
Yeah.
chest or one on their legs. Depends, if their legs sink or not.
Mm.
And you just go from there. And then eventually, every time they kind of come out of the water, as in if they need to get rid of mucus or crowning, as we call it, I think that's where they start to
Mm.
memory coming through or feelings, experiences. And then sometimes, looks if people aren't comfortable face down, then I'll just lie them on their back. And it's just a whole warm water environment that can stimulate the subconscious.
Mm.
It's quite
Oh, it sounds really good. I mean, yeah, I'd actually like to train with someone in that and learn how to do it.
well. If you're ever in Adelaide,
I'll
let's
come by, I'll knock on your door because I'm seriously, that's actually a really lovely idea.
really
Um,
nice. And even the original cold water breathing tech breath work is fantastic as well. And I've
mm,
doing some of that with a colleague lately. We've just been every month just doing
mm,
water immersion, and we're not talking Wim Hof style of cold water. It's not about
no,
full on. It's very gentle, and it has to be done with integrity. If you get cold,
yeah.
come back out and you start again, and it's really, really powerful, very powerful.
Mm. Oh, look, it's something apart from the hot water one, I haven't tried the cold. So, I mean, I'll be interested to find out more. Yeah, all right, good.
So, Phil, when a client experiences something that appears connected to the birth or prenatal,
Mm,
how do you explore it without leading them or suggesting an interpretation? Because that's, I think, something I find that some breath workers do. They kind of lead or interpret, where I
mm,
just allow my clients to, if they're going to get a full-on memory, they'll get it. And I ask them
yeah.
more like, what is that experience for you? What does it feel like?
I totally agree 100%. I may suggest that, I might say something like, oh, that looks like you were, literally crowning or coming down the birth canal, but that sounds like it's really obvious.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might even see spermatozoa, like sort of wave-like movements, like a little, spermatozoa moving and things like that. Perhaps that's a preconception memory. Sometimes that happens. But look, yeah, in terms of birth memory, look, what I noticed is that it's not every person recalls their birth during a breathwork session. Sometimes people have all sorts of different experiences, and the birth is only like a fragment. It's not a full process. I have, I personally have experienced a whole birth process from beginning to end, that out of a breathwork session. Amazing, every detail. I can still remember it.
Yeah.
So, you know, that level of what Groff calls amorphous birth rage was sitting in my system. So this is like a non-specific rage. It's just the rage of coming into existence, especially if it's an unsupported environment from, where I was born. So there's like there's a powerful thing in the psyche that is about recalling the moment you entered the planet through the cervix or being taken out through cesarean. And it is a powerful time for the psyche because it starts to remember the intensity of the experience. I'm not gonna get out. I'm stuck, or I'm gonna die here, or my God, this is scary out here. I'm going to stay behind. I'm not going to come out. All that stuff is really important. Um, or where's mummy? Because they might have gone off to the nursery or gone off until they were sick or whatever. All those things are really important. But again, I don't sit there and analyze it all for them straight after the session. They need to come to me with what they think. That's how I work.
Yep. So the word trauma is used frequently in modern breath work. What
Mm,
does generally trauma aware mean to you? Because that's just like the big thing now in the last, I don't know, how many
yeah.
years everybody has to be trauma informed. What does that mean for you? Like,
Oh, well, I suppose first and foremost, it's about, you know,
mm,
being able to recognize when people are hitting the memory, the nervous system memory of the trauma. You know what I mean? It's not like they're re-experiencing trauma. They're hitting the system memory of the trauma. Does that make sense? In my opinion. And what I'm trying to I suppose it's about what does it mean to be trauma informed? It means the ability to read someone's body, their eyes, their skin color, their breathing pattern. Like what is it? What is trauma? Like it's a in the moment response to something which is overwhelming the nervous system. And there's different ways that the nervous system copes with that. I won't go into those now, but for
mm,
me, it's like if you see that coming up, it doesn't mean that you suddenly have to stop the session or get all stressed about trying to make everything nice again. To me, it's about allowing the person to feel as safe as possible in that moment when they are re-experiencing or rewiring that feeling, that sensation. For example, I've seen clients who've had, very abusive relationships with physically abusive, and sometimes they hit the experience of being hit, so to speak. They literally they feel like they're being hit, and from the outside, it looks like really, incredibly traumatic for the person. But it's like in that moment, that is something that they are it's like I believe that the body has an innate intelligence and it does not generally bring up material that it cannot handle in a sort of like a self-regulation way. But doesn't mean we have to shut that down. I mean, Groff would say, do not shut those intense moments down. He would say, let them move a little bit, let them run, and let them move out and let them move through the body and make sure that all you do is the witness and the presence of safety and calm if the person suddenly jumps back into their rational mind. And that's the art of being a good breath worker, when you know how to handle that sudden eruption of incredibly distressing material without freaking out, and without shutting it down, because you don't want to do that, because that can lead to huge amounts of unresolved tension at the end of a session. Anyway, that's
and
my view. Yeah.
that's what I was leading to. Then I was going to say, what are the signs that someone is moving through a manageable emotional process compared to
Mm.
becoming overwhelmed or dysregulated?
Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
I guess it.
again, breathwork sessions can sometimes take more than 2 hours, right? I mean, in
Oh,
Groff world, they take sometimes 3 hours, but it
okay,
gets a bit
apply that
silly.
one.
But
Yeah.
I feel that, like sometimes because I'm an impatient fellow, right? So sometimes I think, oh, this person's taking too long to have some sort of resolution or integration. I mean, one thing you can do is actually just tell them to slow down and like or to sort of sometimes once you've let something move through, at least say let's say more than 60, 70%, maybe it's not fully gone, but it's like sometimes you just need to provide that reassuring voice that everything's okay. maybe just try a different breath now, or just slow it all down. And you can put on some different music. You can, as a practitioner, you can really help someone feel going to, make them feel like they're going towards a resolution, or to feel like there is some form of integration occurring, even though they haven't got it all out. And the thing is, the worst thing I've seen in a breathwork community is when people are forcing people to go too long into the distressing material. That is the worst thing you can do, and that is not trauma informed. And I've seen some of that, in communities which I have previously respected. So yeah, interesting.
I've seen that too, and I guess it comes with our awareness now, and there's more research, I think, and
Mm.
more information, and I think it's good to take that on board and learn.
What I'm trying to say is that there's enough capacity in the vast majority of people to handle one cathartic or two, even two cathartic intense events during, let's say, an hour and a half altogether, right? If there is more than that, and you extend the session out because more and more material just keeps erupting, I don't think that's a very good way to go, to let that person just keep erupting and erupting and erupting. And then you've got a 2.5 hour session and they're exhausted. Like, do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Like, and I, so it's a fine balance between allowing a certain amount of material and knowing when the person's nervous system has had enough. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm thinking about, I'm flashing back to cases, and yeah, I get that.
Mm.
So, Phil, you've said that breathwork can be more effective than counseling. What experiences led you to that conclusion?
Uh, I suppose I went to a couple of counselors when I was trying to deal with lots of anxiety, because I didn't really know breath work when I was 21 years old. And, I was so shocked. I went to a psychiatrist once in Moonee Ponds in Melbourne. He was sitting behind this huge oak desk. Like, he was like miles over there, and I was here. And he was like, "So, Philip, um, you know, um, tell me what's happening in your life." And it was so bland and so, like, I don't know, it was so overly formalized and dead sounding and dead looking that I thought there's got to be a better way to help understand the psyche than just talking formally to a professional person in that format. I just couldn't quite understand it. And then I think for me, because I had studied meditation, but it still wasn't cracking the anxiety and the high level of wiring in my body, high level of like overstimulation is probably a better way to put it. And I don't know, I think counseling for me, it can be useful because it does help your mind map out a bigger picture, which can bring a sense of relief. It can bring a sense of calm with trying to get a bigger picture and a bigger handle on, what's your role, the mirroring thing of what's, how am I mirroring this out to another person, and projection and all that. However, I don't think it touches things like birth trauma, and it doesn't touch the things that sit beneath the problems that are arising in your conscious mind or unconscious mind, even because it doesn't go down deep enough. And I think that's why. Yeah.
I like that. Thank you. But now I'm going to sort of touch on like becoming a professional breathwork practitioner. So
Yeah.
you've been outspoken about the very short facilitator trainings. What can
Mm.
someone realistically learn in 3 days, and what can they definitely not learn? These 3 day courses.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say that in any group dynamic, day 4 is when people start dropping their masks. So that's number one. So
Mm,
for a 3 day event, everyone's going to be putting on a show, even when they're doing breath work.
yeah.
Um, because there's something that happens on day 4, and I've done lots of work with this, observe this every time. Anyway, that's number one. Number two, you'll learn how to breathe, a conscious connected breath for sure. I mean, you'll learn how to do that. You'll probably have two major experiences over the weekend, maybe, yeah, maybe two, maybe three. Um, and you might have a very strong experience, which is great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a 3 day retreat, but you cannot learn how to breathe and sit for other people in 3 days. I'm sorry. That's just impossible. You would need to do at least 20 sessions yourself before you can even hope to sit for other people.
Mm.
Like, because you don't know what you're dealing with people. I've seen all sorts of things, John, in my what's come out of people. I've seen well, like entity material, I've seen devils, I've seen, full on, you know, trauma, like violence, sexual abuse, whatever. On and on it goes. Like it's big. And if you are triggered by any one of those things in any form, and you start freaking out internally when that's going on, you can't do it. Like
And
you
as
can't do it.
social media now, you see these, 2-day courses, and you're going to make this much money, and I just think, how can even people do that? Like, just get online and just take people's money. I'm on the International Breathwork Foundation professionalism team, and as you know, I've also been integrity officer for the IBF. And we've had so many complaints and things. And, a lot of the things that we're all seeing now is these 2-day courses and, all the garbage that and they're just targeting young people, taking money. And then, I mean, how many of those people really go off and, run successful practices? It's just, who knows? It's
Well, it's
mind-boggling.
probably not many because they probably just forget. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, they could. I suppose they could literally take off and run their own groups and God forbid teach other people.
Well,
But
that's happening, isn't it?
yeah, and look, the thing is, we can't control it. Look, we live in a big wide world. It's like any. I mean, breathwork's going through a craze phase. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It is. It's like breathwork has become a craze.
They always say,
Um,
Phil, that, breathworks has come from the fringe into
yeah.
mainstream. Everybody's talking about it.
And
So
it's good. Look, I mean, look, you could argue that, all boats, rise in the flood, right? So, um, but which is good and bad. But the thing for me is that, like, look, when you talk to people who've only done that sort of training, and then you find and they start listening to you, and you just go, look, the best thing to do is education. That's all we can do, John. We can't be out there policing everything. It's just impossible. So,
public. So Phil, what does competency look like at graduation, and how do you know that a student is ready to hold another person safely, as a
yeah,
trainer?
sure. Um, First of all, the ability to go deep into their shadow material and their unconscious material themselves, right? Number one, have they demonstrated that they've gone deep enough to actually deal with some difficult issues? Because when you're with someone for a year and a half over 4 modules, it's you get to know them, and you know what they've avoided or what they shouldn't be avoiding. So there's that. Have they journeyed deep themselves? Number one. Number two, can they sit with other people's material? Can they sit comfortably and hold the space, so to speak? Can they not just hold the space, but be there for the other person at all times and be present for the full hour and a half, 2 hour, 2.5 hours, whatever it takes? Can they be there? Number two. Number three, would be something like, do they take good notes? Do they take notes? You know, do they ask the right questions of a client? Are they professional in the way they compose themselves? Like, just dress up properly. Don't come to a session in your rags, like something simple.
I agree.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, like, I mean, just that professionalism. So there's the work and the trauma-informed work, and then, yeah, the competency comes from the ability to really um, also know when to intervene and when not to intervene. Don't let your own ego start squashing the person's session. And also, conversely, don't sit back and just do nothing because the person has a sovereign. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you need to sort of have that good balance.
Okay. So what should practitioners understand about transference, counter transference, and the power imbalance that can develop in transformational work?
Ooh.
Hmm. That's one.
Um, I just got to think about this for a minute. It's a big, I mean, I've talked about this a few times in my training.
About transference and counter
Yeah,
transference.
well, let's explain what they are. I mean, basically, what it means is projection, right? Basically, it's a type of unconscious projection. So, for example, say if my client dresses up for me extra nice,
Hmm.
let's say they sort of that they're really like overly friendly, or they're putting out a certain vibe, which means more than just I'm your client. Like, see, that's an example of transference, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. Counter transference is when the practitioner is, putting that on back onto the, let's say in that example that I'm responding to the overly receiving the attention, the sort of the attractiveness attention thing going on. You know what I mean? So if that happens to me, I just basically separate that. I let it run. I don't really like squash it. I just like observe it, but I do not then counter transfer. So because as soon as you make it a thing, you can destroy the therapeutic relationship. So it gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess it's a fine line, Phil, too, because sometimes,
yeah,
overt and uncomfortable. I mean, I've actually stopped sessions and asked them to go somewhere else when it's been
yeah.
quite
I
intense.
think what happens is if in that situation where something is happening, the transference is coming, and I don't respond, it usually evaporates. That's
Mm,
what I notice.
yeah.
Because it's like this count. There's the reason they say transference and counter transference all the time because that is, it's often like a seesaw. Do you get it? Like it goes this way, then it gives it back. Like, but if you just play the dead bat, it often disappears, and you build trust then, and you build a deeper relationship rather than just what's on the surface. You know.
So you do a lot of shadow work.
Uh, I say I do a little. Yeah, I wouldn't say a lot. The reason I do, when I say I do it, I mean I do include it in all my short retreats and also my breathwork trainings. I wouldn't put more than 20% into my course, 10% really, not a lot.
For people that don't know what shadow work is, how do you describe it?
Yeah. Look, it's a concept. It's actually not a reality. It's a concept to allow us to understand the unloved, unwanted, and discarded aspects of ourselves. That could be smiling in public. It could be that our joy is in our shadow. It could be that we're actually a nice person to other people, but actually we're a tyrant on the inside, and it
Mm,
occasionally bursts out. It could be something like shame, guilt. They all live in the shadow, right? Shame particularly is a big one. Um, and all, but it's interesting because what you do is you can't get rid of your shadow, hence the word shadow. It's always following you. What you do is you turn towards it, and there's a lot of things to turn towards, I can tell you. And it's like you turn towards these aspects, the inner dictator or the the victim or the sad the
mm,
sad, cynical person or whatever it is. And you sort of you start listening to it rather than rejecting it. And there's things you can do. You can have those conversations with two cushions and you're staring at a mirror and you're talking to that aspect of yourself when you swap positions. And you can do all that stuff. So
mm.
we do a bit of that in our course. I'd also just give people some reading material about the shadow in an easy to understand form. I'm still surprised that it is not well understood in healing circles. Do you know what I mean? It still shocks me. I mean, people have heard of it,
Mm.
but you don't have to do a lot of shadow work. You just do a little bit and just understand it a bit. And it's just a really useful construct, because it helps people understand those really neglected parts of themselves. And that's really important.
That reminds me of a memory I had. I can't remember what country. I was at a conference and they decided to have an evening where you would bring your shadow to a party and you had to be the shadow. And it was
Wow.
so much fun. It was a lot of fun, actually. You had all sorts of people from being really shy to the really busy people to the, angry people or the stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so that was,
And everyone's got a different style of shadow. I mean, there are some, Jung puts some sort of parameters on, the archetypes. You can have archetypal shadows as well. Um, and then you move into the collective unconscious. The reason I think shadow work's important is because of ancestral trauma. And ancestral trauma comes up all the time in breathwork. And I just think if you want to understand the reasons for ancestral trauma, you need to also understand the collective unconscious and the shadow. Like these things erupt in cultures and societies and they cause havoc. But they're there everywhere in every culture and you can't escape it. There is no escaping it. And it's just like there is that wonderful thing about understanding that there's something with ancestral trauma, or when I say ancestral trauma, I mean disturbances in the family line that come from often eruptions of bad shadow material in a culture. War, famine, um, domestic violence, whatever, whatever you want to go with it, you know. Hmm.
Um, what happens internally for you, Phil, when you're facilitating a deeply emotional session?
Oh,
I'm sure you've had plenty of those.
okay. In terms of what I have with me, I have an empathetic shield.
Mm,
So I'm not, when someone is being highly emotional, I can have a level of empathy with that person and watch and be with it. And sometimes I may feel a little bit here moving in my own heart chakra or my own gut, especially if it's loud or aggressive, it might be the guts, but if it's more heartfelt, it'll be up here. And however, I also have a bit of a shield. I mean, it's a bit of a translucent shield, right? So it's not solid steel, but it's solid enough that I'm not, like becoming involved in the story of that person.
yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, people can, express intense fear or rage,
Mm.
grief, or, whatever, some physical
Yeah.
activation. Yeah.
And look, so to tell you the truth, I've got my empathetic shield, but sometimes the noise that comes out of a person is so frightening, so
Mm.
scary that it penetrates every part of my body.
I had those screams
And I get the shivers.
yeah.
But that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm being contaminated by dark energy. All it means is that I am feeling the energy that's just come out, right? And I'm not a robot. I feel it like everybody else.
Remember.
And and it's like the empathetic shield is just sometimes not strong enough. So that's okay. I feel the heat of it. I feel sometimes the shakiness of it. And but I'm also like, I'm here in the room. What I do, so the thing is like you breathe and you focus. If you're knocked off a bit, and you just bring yourself back really quickly, and I can do that pretty quickly. I'm not off for minutes. I'm off for seconds. You know what I mean?
So, Phil, how do you look after your own nervous system after holding, say, a retreat or an intensive training?
Mm.
I'm sure you've had periods.
Yeah. Okay, there's three things. One is mental preparation. So
Mm,
not just a spiritual preparation, but just a mental preparation. How am I going to deliver this? And what is my what's my not my outcome, that sounds too corporate. What's my intention for to really to be with myself, and how do I deliver this, with a really empathetic heart, or do I have a more sort of historical viewpoint, or like just mental preparation to feel confident where I'm coming from. That's number one, because if people feel your confidence, then they can also feel your safety. It's like
yes, yeah.
do you know what I mean? There's like a bit of mental preparation, like any sort of good lecturer or good showman, if you want, needs to do, to be on the ball with my intellect as well as my empathy and my energetic field and my teaching. Um, Number two is make sure that, I'm not drinking for a few days before I run a treat. Like I have a bit of red wine sometimes. I clear those things out of my system. I get a little bit purer. I'm not a purist, but I'll certainly make sure that I'm going into a deeper space prior to doing something. Does that make sense?
Like some people fast or they change their diet,
Yeah.
their comedy, like I know I like to exercise and get clear and
Yeah. I'll make sure that I'm sleeping properly, that I'm not indulging in, my usual and not so much of a routine. And what happens is it doesn't even, sometimes it just happens. I might have more attunement with nature and I might get a few more signals or strange omens or things like that start happening. You know what I mean? Dreams. And so that's all preparation too, but at an unconscious level. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah.
Um, but in terms of my own nervous system, I tend to have a high output, and I've had to learn how to slow down my speech in public. I still feel a little bit anxious when I'm presenting, but it doesn't impact the ability of me to provide a really good breathwork retreat or a breathwork training, but I can still feel a bit of anxiety. Often I don't sleep that well.
Mm.
Um, and I just manage that the best I can. I acknowledge that it happens. I can't be the total Zen monk the whole 8 days, the whole 10 days. But I'm certainly not into losing my temper with my students, and I'm certainly not into telling them off like a school teacher. That is not what I do, even if I'm tired, even if I'm a bit overwhelmed with it all, because it's a lot, you know.
Very odd type of behavior, I guess, and trainings. Um,
Yeah. And I've heard stories of breathwork teachers who lose their patience and shout at their students. And I just go, no, you shouldn't be doing that at all. I don't care what the circumstances are.
there's something I actually heard today. There was a complaint against some trainers, and about yelling and interesting.
Yeah, I do not understand. This is not boot camp.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, there's other ways to deal with behaviors which you're not agreeing with, you know. Um,
So
and
let's talk about the profession and the future of breathwork now. So breathwork has expanded rapidly. What excites you about that growth, Phil, and what concerns you?
mm. Okay, well, you know what excites me is that it's bringing it to a lot of people. So,
Mm,
for example, 9D Breathwork is a franchise coming out of America. It uses NLP and binaural beats in the headphones, and it uses a two-step breath. And it's quite, I don't agree with everything they do, but even though they're not of the professional standard of ABA professionals, I would argue that at least they're bringing it to a really big, what I call working class audience in Melbourne, and I really like, at some level, I really like the working class attitude, right? They're just like, there's no bullshit. These are people who have just got nothing that they're apart from counseling, and that, they're discovering themselves for the first time in their life that they've got an internal world. I mean, to me, that is fantastic. And they're reaching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in Melbourne every week, you know. And
mm,
now there's also a bit of a downside to that sometimes in that it can, it's sort of like it's a big number of people in a room and people get a bit lost and, I don't know. There's a bit of a downside to all those big mass events, where you've just got one, a couple of facilitators and there's like a big room of 100 people. I think people's personal journeys can get a bit stylized or something. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. So, Phil, what should the public look for when choosing a breathwork practitioner?
Um, I think they should look for a quality that they find interesting about the practitioner, number one. So what is the quality of the person? Maybe it's obviously you have a look at a photo of them. That's the first thing. We're image conscious people. So what's the person look like? Is this a person that I could probably go to, and then read, not just what they look like, but then read what they've actually done. Have they done at least 400 hours of training somewhere to do with breath work, not other things? Um, and are they a qualified practitioner? If I'm going to a training, are they a trainer, not just a practitioner? So that gets another level of, complicatedness. The other thing I'd look for is someone who I would probably steer away personally from people who come across as, like maybe too much of a guru. I tend to like people who are a bit more pragmatic and don't overly talk about spiritual things in the beginning. I think that what they should be talking about is the therapeutic outcome of breath work. How can I deal with my depression, anxiety, eating disorder, divorce, whatever? To me, that's what I'm looking for in a practitioner if I'm going to someone.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So, what has breathwork taught you about being human, Phil?
Well, that's a really good question, John. Um,
I ask that a lot to other breath workers too, like especially practitioners
what
like,
does it teach me about being human?
yeah.
At a big level, I think it's drawn me closer to the idea of that it's a bit like, Shakespeare's line, life is but a stage. And I don't know, there's something really deeply spiritual about breath work, which I've come to over the years, which is that, I don't know, like it's almost like there is something called destiny, and we have free will within the sort of a destiny, if you know what I mean. But I feel that breathwork gave me the sense of belonging to not so much other people who were doing breathwork, but a sense of belonging to the greater human drama, the greater human epoch of where we are. Does that
Mm.
make sense? It's like it connects me to not just people who do breathwork, but the whole shebang, the whole trip of human history, and moving out from that into the universe, and what are those energies that come from the universe into this thing called a human being. That I find fascinating, and that I find nurturing. So that's what I got out of it. It gives me a sense of belonging and nurture. Yeah.
Great. So, you've had about 2 decades in this work, Phil. So, what continues to surprise you about it?
Oh, what surprises me about it, having just come off doing 2 days with people up at Wollongong, I'm always fascinated by people's willingness to have a bit of courage around their internal state. Um, and that's what I love about people who come to breathwork who have a good go at it. I mean, they may be coming because a friend invited them, but it's just for people to have the courage of going into the unknown. I just find that still surprising because there's a lot of fear in the world. There's a lot of fear about people moving into those inner worlds. And so when someone's in front of you and they want to do breath work, they're they're really trusting, and I find that an amazing thing still.
Mm.
Mm.
And so to finish, what does the breath mean to you today? You've come on this amazing journey last, 2 decades. What is it? What does the breath mean and represent for you today, Phil?
I just, did an at-home breath work recently, just a small one to myself. And you know what? What it means to me is that it gives me a sense of a felt sense of being here in the and it being here, but also knowing where I am in time and space. It gives me a point of reference,
Mm.
which is the opposite of alienation, which is the opposite of feeling disembodied, which is the opposite of feeling like I don't I'm insignificant, and that's what it gives me. It gives me a sense of significance. Does that
Mm.
make sense? That I have the right to exist on the planet, and I am making a difference, not in an ego way, but just like that I am here. And
That's very Phil, isn't it? When it's
yeah. And that's what it means to me personally. And I think everyone can have that. And I mean, it almost sounds like I'm talking about, finding God. It's, but at the end of the day, it is about that wanting to connect with the non-ordinary state of consciousness so we can connect to something bigger than ourselves. It's a critical part of the human condition that we need to have it. Otherwise, you
Mm.
just can see what happens on the planet.
Yeah.
And we have to have that ability to just go into a place which is non-ordinary. That's
Mm.
why people love drugs. That's why people have all sorts of problems in the nervous system because, they want to escape. They want to escape to something better than what's around them. And breath work is not an escape. Breath work is a fantastic tool to find about to just have a sense of belonging and feeling loved without having to have external chemical inputs, or you know what I mean? Mm,
Okay. Well, Phil, thank you for sharing about your journey and, speaking so openly about the depth of it. Uh,
mm. Yeah, thanks, John. It's been great to just like hear all these questions, and it's like, oh wow, I really actually became quite passionate about this stuff.
and it's really nice to do this with you because I know I've worked with you for the last how many years?
Mm.
Worked on the Australian Breathwork Association,
I
but
don't know, 8 years, 10 years, I can't remember now.
we never really have time to sort of get in-depth conversations like this. However, it's been really warming and really nice to see this depth of, in your experience.
Mm.
So much knowledge too. So, and I love learning too. So that's one of the reasons why I do these interviews with.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, I'm going to start watching them now because I know that you're doing them. Oh, what are the breath workers? How do they talk about breath work? Yeah, it's good.
People find you, Phil. What your website is inspired.
Yeah, inspiredbreath.com.au. Yeah, or you can just contact me on the page there, or just find me on the internet. My phone number's, if you just type in Phil Morey, Bega, New South Wales, or Phil Morey Breathwork, South Coast, New South Wales, I'll come up, and the phone number's on the internet.
Awesome. All right, Phil.
Great. Thanks, John. Love it.